never thought a morning like this could exist, one where the world I trusted, the life I thought I understood, would unravel with a single sentence on a piece of paper. That morning, the sun rose gently over the beach, spilling gold across the water and lighting up the little house I had spent half a lifetime cherishing. The house wasn't just wood and nails. It was laughter echoing from the kitchen, footsteps racing down the hall, the smell of salt and sunscreen and summer nights. My children had grown up here. My husband and I had built our dreams here, and the walls had absorbed 100 tiny moments that made it ours. I walked the familiar creaking floors that morning, the boards beneath my feet whispering memories of summers past, thinking about how lucky we had been to have this little slice of paradise. The phone rang, piercing the quiet with the shrill insistence of urgency. I answered, expecting maybe a neighbor with news about the tide or a reminder about the upcoming homeowners meeting. Instead, the voice on the other end delivered a sentence that shattered the world I thought was unshakable. "Mrs. Carter," the agent said politely, "the property at 142 Seabreeze Lane is no longer listed under your name. It has been sold." I froze, the words hanging in the air like smoke I couldn't breathe through. My fingers tightened around the phone as my mind raced. Sold. How could this be? I had one daughter, Emily, and my first thought was disbelief. My next thought was accusation, rising like a storm inside me. My stomach churned as I remembered her last visit, her casual jokes about wanting to flip the house someday, her eyes gleaming with excitement at new plans. At the time, I had smiled indulgently, dismissing her ambition as harmless, youthful energy. But now, that energy felt like a hammer striking the fragile walls of trust between us. I sat down heavily in the living room chair, the sunlight streaming through the windows doing nothing to warm me. Betrayal tastes bitter, I realized, and it hits even harder when it comes from your own child. I replayed our last family dinner in my mind, searching for signs I had missed. Emily had seemed normal, polite even, chatting about work and her friends, sipping her wine with a smile I had always trusted. Had I missed the gleam of greed in her eye? The subtle hints of entitlement I had written off as ambition. Now I couldn't remember her voice without suspicion. And yet I couldn't fully hate her. My heart rebelled against that. A part of me wanted to rush to her, to demand answers, to hear her side before letting the anger take over. But another part of me, cautious, calculating, knew I had to understand the full picture first. I pulled out the papers I kept meticulously in the small office tucked away upstairs. The deeds, the insurance policies, the maintenance receipts, everything that proved our ownership. My hands trembled slightly as I flipped through them, the weight of history pressing down. The house had been in our family for decades. It had survived storms, renovations, and even the occasional neighborhood dispute. It was more than property, it was a legacy. And now, someone had tried to erase it, as if my feelings and our history were invisible, as if our years of love and care could be liquidated with a signature I had never given. The more I read, the more tangled the situation became. Apparently, Emily had met with a real estate agent several weeks prior, shown them the house, and signed papers I had never seen. There was mention of a buyer, an eager couple from out of state, excited about the ocean views, ready to start a new chapter. And while part of me wanted to imagine them enjoying the home, another part, a sharper, protective part, seethed at the thought of my memories being repackaged as a commodity. How could she? How could she think she had the right to sell something that wasn't hers to sell? I remembered all the little things that had made that house ours. The handprints Emily left on the sliding glass door when she was 5, the nights I spent with her under the stars on the balcony, telling her stories about my own childhood. I thought about my husband, gone now, who had designed the little garden path along the dunes, planting flowers that would bloom every spring without fail. Those moments couldn't be sold, yet somehow, Emily's signature had tried to erase them from reality. The betrayal cut deeper because it wasn't just a financial mistake. It was emotional, almost surgical in its precision. Anger surged and ebbed in waves. I could almost hear the voice of the house, whispering through the boards and windows. "Remember who we are. Remember what you've built." And yet, alongside the anger was a creeping self-doubt. Had I been naive? Had I let her believe she had more control than she really did? I had always encouraged independence, had always trusted my children to make their own decisions, believing that love and guidance would prevent catastrophe. But now, that trust felt naive, almost reckless, and I wondered how I had misjudged the situation so completely. I decided to take a step back. Running to Emily, confronting her with raw emotion, might feel satisfying in the moment, but it wouldn't solve anything. I needed clarity, understanding, and a plan. I began making calls, lawyers, friends who had handled property matters, anyone who could help untangle this mess. Each conversation revealed new layers of complication. The house had technically been sold. The buyer's deposit was non-refundable. The agent claimed Emily had presented herself as the owner. The pieces fit together like a cruel puzzle, each new detail heightening my disbelief. At the same time, I couldn't help but dwell on Emily herself. She had always been ambitious, sometimes brash, driven by a desire to make her mark. But ambition without guidance can turn reckless, and I was starting to see a pattern I hadn't noticed before. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a collision of personality and circumstance. And yet, beneath it all, I still loved her. That made the betrayal sting even more sharply. The contrast between my protective instincts and the realization of her deception created a tension in my chest I couldn't ignore. I walked through the house, touching the banister she had once clung to as a child, smelling the faint scent of the ocean drifting in through open windows. Memories and reality collided in a swirl of emotion. How could the place that had been sanctuary now feel so alien? How could the safety of home dissolve into legal and emotional chaos in a matter of days? I felt simultaneously small, powerless, and yet determined. Determination, I realized, might be the only weapon I had in a battle where love and betrayal were entwined so tightly. Late into the evening, I sat with a folder of documents spread before me, the legal terms looming like an unfamiliar language. The more I read, the more I realized that there might be a way forward, that Emily, in her haste and overconfidence, had overlooked something critical: the land itself. My hands hovered over the papers, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The idea that I still might retain control sparked a flicker of hope amid the devastation. For the first time since discovering the sale, I felt a shift, a subtle, powerful recognition that weakness could turn into strength, that betrayal could be met with careful, strategic action. I thought about confronting Emily, but not yet. She was still operating under the assumption that the sale was complete, that the transaction had taken everything from me. That assumption, I realized, was a mistake on her part, and mistakes like that could be turned to advantage. I had to be patient, deliberate, and precise. My mind raced with possibilities, weighing moral considerations against practical ones, emotions against strategy. The house had always been a place of memories, but now it had become a battlefield of wills, testing love, trust, and resilience in ways I had never imagined. Sleep came fitfully that night, if it came at all. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind through the dunes reminded me of what was at stake. In the quiet hours, I reflected on my own values, on the contrast between greed and integrity, on the delicate balance between protecting what is yours and maintaining trust with those you love. I realized that the next steps I took would define not just the fate of the house, but the nature of my relationship with Emily, and perhaps even her understanding of responsibility, respect, and legacy. By dawn, a plan had begun to form, not a hasty confrontation, but a careful, deliberate course of action. I would investigate every legal avenue, confirm ownership rights, and approach the situation with clarity and moral authority. This wasn't just about reclaiming a house. It was about asserting boundaries, teaching accountability, and preserving the memories that had made the property sacred in the first place. My heart still ached from betrayal, but it was no longer paralyzed by it. The tide had shifted. The storm of shock and anger was giving way to focus, strategy, and a growing, quiet confidence that the truth and justice might still prevail. And as I looked out at the ocean, watching the waves crash against the shore, I whispered to myself a promise. You may have tried to take this from me, Emily, but I still hold the foundation, and I will protect it no matter what it takes. In that moment, the house felt like mine again, not just as a property, but as a symbol of resilience, love, and the power to reclaim what was rightfully yours. The journey ahead would be difficult, emotional, and fraught with tension, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was far from over. The morning after my restless night, I sat at the kitchen table with the deeds and legal papers spread before me like a battlefield map. Each document was a clue, a weapon, a lifeline. I had spent the better part of the previous evening combing through ownership records, and for the first time a spark of hope flickered. Emily had made a crucial mistake. She had sold the house, yes, but she had completely overlooked the land itself, the foundation beneath the structure, the soil that held the walls, the sand she had played in as a child. That land was mine. Legally, unequivocally, entirely mine. The realization sent a shiver down my spine, a mix of vindication and empowerment. I leaned back in my chair, imagining Emily's smug expression the day she handed over the papers to the buyer. The arrogance in her eyes had been so palpable, the certainty so complete, as if the house were hers to do with as she pleased. And now, that certainty would become her undoing. I didn't feel triumph in a cruel sense, but in a deep, moral one, the quiet satisfaction of righting a wrong, not through revenge, but through careful, intelligent action. There was a power in strategy that raw anger could never match. The first step was to confirm everything legally. I called the real estate attorney I had used years ago for the purchase, a kind but sharp-eyed man named Mr. Henderson. His voice carried authority and reassurance as he walked me through the ownership nuances. The structure can be sold, he explained, but the land itself is separate. If you still hold the title, any use by the new buyer could be contested. You have options, negotiation, formal notices, even injunctions if necessary. I felt the weight of possibility settle on my shoulders. This wasn't just about reclaiming property. This was about asserting boundaries, protecting legacy, and reclaiming dignity. I began to plan my approach carefully. The last thing I wanted was to escalate the situation emotionally before understanding every legal angle. Emily would expect confrontation fueled by anger, by hurt. But my calm, deliberate steps could disarm her, make her realize the depth of her oversight without it ever becoming a public spectacle. There was artistry in this kind of strategy, precision over passion, patience over impulsivity. That afternoon, I drafted a letter to the real estate agent and the buyers, laying out the situation clearly but firmly. I explained that the land beneath the house remained in my name, and that any transactions involving the structure alone could not override ownership rights. I kept the tone professional but assertive, the kind that conveyed both authority and moral integrity. It was difficult to imagine Emily reading the words without panic creeping into her confident demeanor. She had thought she could act without oversight. Now, the truth would settle like a heavy tide, inexorable and undeniable. While I prepared the documents, I reflected on Emily herself. Her motivations became clearer as I examined the situation with clarity and empathy. She had wanted independence, recognition, perhaps even a sense of accomplishment that she felt she hadn't earned in other areas of her life. But ambition untethered from accountability can become recklessness, and her haste to sell had blinded her to consequences. I could feel both frustration and compassion simultaneously, a complex, almost contradictory swirl of emotion. That duality strengthened my resolve rather than weakening it. It reminded me why I had loved her so fiercely despite the betrayal. When I finally called Emily, I let the phone ring several times before she answered, giving me a moment to collect my thoughts and mask the tension beneath calmness. Her voice was bright, expectant, almost gleeful, as if nothing could touch her victory. "Mom," she said, "did you hear? The buyers are thrilled and it all went smoothly. Isn't this amazing?" There was a note of arrogance in her tone, a dangerous assumption of invulnerability. "I did hear, Emily," I said carefully, keeping my voice steady. "And there's something important you need to understand about that sale." I could hear a subtle shift, a faint falter in her confidence, though she tried to mask it. "The land beneath the house," I continued, "is still legally mine. The structure cannot exist independently of the land for the purposes of ownership or transfer. That oversight is significant." Was a pause on the line, almost imperceptible but unmistakable. Then she laughed nervously. "Mom, come on, it's just a technicality." "We can fix that, right?" I let the silence linger, allowing the weight of my words to sink in. Silence can be more devastating than confrontation, and I had learned that in decades of negotiation and family dynamics. I spent the next few days coordinating with Mr. Henderson, drafting formal notices, and preparing for the next stage. Emily tried several times to bypass the formal process, calling frantically, pleading, and even attempting to charm me into concession. Each time, I responded with calm, measured clarity. I did not yield to pressure, because yielding would have negated both the legal authority and the moral lesson. Her initial confidence began to waver under the quiet storm of my strategy. I could sense it in her tone, in the subtle cracks in her arguments, in the way she paused before speaking. Then came the moment of direct negotiation with the buyers. I met them at the house, walking them through the property as if showing them not just walls and windows, but the foundation of ownership itself. I explained the legal realities, the rights that I retained, and the potential consequences of ignoring them. Their expressions shifted from anticipation to concern, then to understanding. It was a delicate dance, asserting authority without alienating them completely. By the end of the conversation, they were cooperative, appreciative of my transparency, and willing to adjust their approach. That day, I felt a sense of empowerment unlike anything before. The power of integrity and clarity had turned a potentially bitter situation into one of moral triumph. Emily arrived shortly after, face pale and lips pressed tightly together. She had expected chaos, confrontation, or perhaps even capitulation. Instead, she found calm, unwavering resolve. I could see the shock ripple through her, an uncomfortable recognition that confidence alone cannot override law, morality, or wisdom. We walked through the house together, and I let her see not just the property, but the care, history, and memories embedded in every corner. Her arrogance softened into a reluctant acknowledgement, and I realized that the most profound lessons often come wrapped in humility. Throughout the process, I maintained a careful balance of emotion and authority. I did not berate or humiliate Emily. Instead, I allowed the situation to teach her organically, guided by the quiet but undeniable weight of truth. The contrast between her initial recklessness and my deliberate strategy highlighted not just personal growth, but the enduring value of integrity over impulse. Each interaction, each conversation, became a lesson in respect, accountability, and the long-term rewards of patience and moral clarity. In the days that followed, I watched Emily's understanding deepen. She apologized, not just in words, but in demeanor, in her willingness to acknowledge error and accept guidance. It was humbling, watching her confront her own flaws while I maintained my role as protector, teacher, and parent. The balance of power had shifted subtly, not through domination, but through clarity, patience, and moral authority. I realized that true strength is often quiet, measured, and principled, rather than loud, reactive, or vindictive. As the legal matters concluded, and the house and land were once again fully secure under my control, I felt a profound sense of closure. This was not just about property. It was about legacy, love, and the lessons that define character. Emily had learned accountability. I had reinforced the importance of integrity. And together, we had navigated a storm that could have destroyed both our relationship and our family memories. I reflected on the contrast between greed and wisdom, recklessness and patience, and realized that these experiences shape not just outcomes, but people. Standing on the balcony that evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon and paint the waves in shades of gold and crimson, I felt a deep, encompassing peace. The house had survived storms before. It had withstood time, care, and love. Now it had also survived betrayal, challenge, and the testing of boundaries. I whispered to the wind, "We endure because integrity guides us and love anchors us." Emily joined me silently, and I could sense her reflection, the quiet acknowledgement of lessons learned and respect earned. We did not need many words. The house, the land, and the shared history spoke volumes. Trust, once fractured, was beginning to mend, not because forgiveness was easy, but because accountability and integrity had laid the foundation. That night, I wrote in my journal, capturing every emotion, every legal nuance, every reflection on strategy and morality. I wanted to remember this lesson in vivid detail: the importance of calm action over reaction, of integrity over impulse, and of the quiet strength that comes from knowledge, clarity, and love. Looking back on the ordeal, I understood that the real triumph was never about reclaiming property alone. It was about asserting values, protecting legacy, and guiding the next generation with wisdom rather than fear. Emily's ambition, once reckless, now had a framework. My strength, once latent, now shone in clarity and purpose. The house was safe, the land secure, and our bond, though tested, had endured. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape not of destruction, but of growth, understanding, and moral victory. In the end, I realized that justice, strategy, and triumph are not measured solely in victories over others, but in the courage to act rightly, the wisdom to wait, and the integrity to balance authority with compassion. And as I watched Emily quietly absorb these lessons, I felt hope, not just for the house or for the land, but for the future, for our family, and for the enduring power of doing what is right, even when it is hard, even when betrayal seems to dominate. We stood together, looking out over the waves, a silent acknowledgement passing between us. Lessons had been learned, respect had been restored, and a foundation, legal, moral, and emotional, had been reaffirmed. This was more than a victory. It was a reaffirmation of what it means to act with courage, wisdom, and unwavering integrity. And in that moment, I knew with certainty, no matter what challenges come next, no force could take from me what had been earned through patience, love, and principled action. The house, the land, and the family legacy were secure, not just by law, but by the quiet strength of moral triumph.